Good evening. Boy, have I got a juicy one for you tonight. Well, the Deaconess of the Demise is on. Someone once said, and I have to give you the chapter right off the bat, chapter 19. This is serious. Someone once said, if you can't talk about sex, you shouldn't be having any. But the same doesn't ring true about dying. It's inevitable. But most people wait to the last minute. Hollies. Most people wait to the last minute or when they know they're going to die. It's not something that Thanksgiving is around, not 20 family members and friends, and raise your hand and go, I got to tell y'all something. I have 3 months to live. I'm dying. Well, if you want to stop the Thanksgiving party, that'll do it. My issue with this chapter is it's inevitable, but I'm going to give it to you right off the bat, and then I will ask you some questions. Chapter 19 on Wednesday, the 29th of June, and I have heard this a dozen times from people. This is a story of a wife who had to talk to her sister about dying because her husband could not deal with it, and she didn't understand why it was so hard that they couldn't. This story was not in the care center, someone I met on a plane, but she had talked to her sister about it because her husband couldn't handle it. Now I say to you, how would you handle a prognosis like that? Or someone finds out they have a life-threatening terminal. I hate that terminal too. It's just for buses and trains and places. A life-threatening, life-altering illness. How do you tell your family? How do you tell your husband, your loved one? Where are the words? When is the time? Have you experienced it? Have you seen people or heard people who've been through this? She had to talk to her sister because her husband couldn't handle it. It's real, folks. The quote here is, if we talk about living, then we must talk about dying. Both go hand in hand. Denying it will not prevent it. How's that? So if you want to all leave right now, bye. That's the reality of life. I write about life. I write about stories about life. I don't make stories up, though I'm real good at it. I write about people who I've met, who I meet. I'm just not in a writing mode, but could I write about anybody and anything? If you have a story, I can write it. If you have a good story that I can write, I can tell it, which is one of the reasons I want a show. But anyway, I'm going to start now with this one because it's really serious. And as I said, I've had this happen personally to people. Chapter 19. The wife who had to talk to her sister about dying because her husband could not deal with it. And she didn't understand why it was so hard. The one person who you loved the most couldn't handle it. If we talk about living, then we must talk about dying. There's nobody else reading on Facebook stories about this. I call myself the Deaconess of the Demise. Both go hand in hand, and denying it will not prevent it. No. Nope. That's it. December. I didn't put my glasses on just for one moment so you get the true effect of this. There we are, children. There's still a little bit of humor in me. For sure. All right, let's get into this story. It's amazing. Again, you want to meet people where they are? That's all you got to do. Just meet them where they are. Don't go down memory lane with strangers. Don't hack on people you don't know. Meet them where they are. You meet a person on the journey on where they are in life. That's all. I don't have a history with you. I'm making a memory now. That's all. December 1999. Dear Jeff. Death doesn't take a vacation, no, or have a day of rest. The Christmas and New Year's holidays are next week. And though it's been 5 years since your death, they are still horribly painful. And don't you tell me out there that their holidays or special occasions or something are not horribly painful to get through. Everybody's celebrating and going to grandma's house for this and no, not everybody's happy. Some people spend their holidays alone because their families are gone. Yeah, it's not all wrap the presents and put them under a tree. Get real, people. People are suffering. And if you relate to that, maybe you'll do volunteer work. Maybe you'll go into into one of these soup kitchens. Get out of yourself. It still helps to help others. I did a lot of soup kitchens, a lot of hospice, suicide prevention, cancer society. I did a lot of volunteering at a lot of events because I found the holidays awful sad. But give to others. The Christmas and New Year's holidays are next week, and though it's been 5 years since your death, they are still horribly painful, and they still are. I find it difficult to stay positive and keep myself together. I disliked these holidays when you were alive. I did. I was one of those people who always said, they're for children. The Easter Bunny is dead. He's just chocolate. Christmas Santa is too fat to get down the chimney. It's for kids. I dislike these holidays when you're alive. I detest them even more now that you are gone. And that's Jewish holidays, Chinese holidays, Christmas holidays. I don't like them. I don't like any of these days. Today could be as good as it gets, Lisa. Today could be the best day of your life. Getting together with family and friends, shopping for gifts, wrapped in pretty red and green paper, lights twinkling as they decorate houses and shrubs, and music telling of joy and salvation only seems hypocritical and sacrilegious. Boy, I'm going to get a few comments on this one. But I know one thing, I'm speaking for a lot of you who want to say things, but you don't. The focus is on partying and celebrating, yet all I hear is noise, and what I feel is chaos and disruption. I find comfort knowing that these days will soon be over. I've learned to celebrate every day, and I am thankful for the gift of life. I'll spend more time at the care center and give to those in need. My problems compared to theirs are small and insignificant. Many will lose their loved ones. Their holidays in the future will become saddening and heartbreaking times. They will not feel joyous or want to celebrate because their loved ones are gone forever. Talk about the last few years. Yeah. Their pain and sorrow will be too much for them to bear. Many will be unable to talk openly about those who have died. Some will pretend by avoiding or denying their loss. Loneliness and despair will become their family, while isolation and depression their bedmates. The subject of death and dying can make holidays even more unbearable. Think about what I just said, and I'm telling some of you out there, it's okay to feel that way. Hello, Greg. It's okay to feel that way. People put on these fronts and these faces and makeup and earrings and clothes. Get into the person. Many will be unable to talk openly about those who have died. I know people right now can't talk about it. Don't cry. Don't talk about it. Some will pretend by avoiding or denying their loss. Yeah, loneliness and despair will become their family, while isolation and depression their bedmates. The subject of death and dying can make holidays even more unbearable. I mean, I've met them all. I've heard it all. I've seen it all. But why are the issues of death and dying so difficult to talk about? I mean, really. Why can't death be discussed as easily as birth, love, health, and happiness? Why are these topics openly and comfortably dealt with in schools? Oh, why aren't here? Well, but why are the issues of death and dying so difficult to talk about? Here we go. Why can't death be discussed as easily as birth, love, health, and happiness? Why aren't these topics openly and comfortably dealt with in schools, at home, between friends? is the fear or denial? Is it fear or denial that causes most people to wait until they are faced with their own mortality or a loved one's impending death to speak about it? How many of you have wills and the other stuff drawn up, and your living wills and your trusts, and have your affairs in order? Right, sure you do. Not. And why are we able to talk only about death when it pertains to a business, or it is in a religious setting? I got to do this one again. Is it fear or denial that caused this one's so intense for me? I'm so into it. Is it fear or denial that causes most people to wait, or until they are faced with their own mortality or a loved one's impending death to speak about it? And why are we able to talk about death when it pertains to a business, all right, or if it is a religious setting? But why are we unable to verbalize it in or at an intimate and personal level? And why do we mislead so many children about the issue of death, shielding them from the truth? If death is the eventuality of life, why is this subject not discussed as part of the educational curriculum? Whoa, did I just throw you all a nugget to chew on? Whew. I didn't even expect this one. I never read this story before. This is serious. I'm going to get a lot of stuff on this one. If death is the eventuality of life, why is this subject not discussed as part of an educational curriculum? Would it make it easier to talk about death and or dying if perhaps one was more comfortable? With his or her own mortality. And why does death have to be a depressing topic of conversation? Might that indicate that you yourself are a depressing individual or a morbid person? I never read this stuff before. This is so good. Right, here we go. Would it make it easier to talk about death and or dying if perhaps one was more comfortable with his or her own mortality? And why does death have to be a depressing topic of conversation? Might that indicate that you yourself are a depressing individual or a morbid person? Oh, that's great. It is a difficult It is a difficult topic to discuss simply for one reason. It is the most personal topic you may ever have to think about. Yes, it is a serious matter. But maybe, just maybe, isn't there a possibility that by having an open conversation about this subject might lessen the feeling of gloom and doom that does accompany this eventual reality? How do you approach it? This story tells about a woman who couldn't talk to her husband about her death. She turned to her twin sister for comfort and support instead of her spouse of 30 years. You're all going to have something to think about. Whenever you come on to this one, you're going to go, oof, intense. He couldn't talk about it because it was too painful for him to accept. 30 years married. She had to talk to her twin sister. He couldn't talk about it because it was too painful for him to accept. The story did not happen at the care center, but in an airport terminal while I was flying to New York to visit my parents. As I placed my bag under the seat, I glanced at the woman sitting to the right of me. She was small, terribly thin, and looked lost in her seat. Since we were seated in an emergency exit row, my first thought was that she wouldn't be able to open the door in case of an emergency. My fight or flight kicked in then. But an hour later, I realized that she hadn't moved. She never uncrossed her legs, moved around in her seat, or turned the pages of the driver's manual she was totally engrossed in. I saw that. She just continued to read it as if it was the last book she might ever pick up. I finally said to her, "You are so intense in that driver's handbook. Either that's the most interesting book about motoring you've ever read, or there's something behind those pages those unturned pages. She laughed, and her face lit up with the most beautiful smile I'd ever seen. So I said to her, stranger, here she was, I finally said to her, "You are so intense with that driver's handbook. Either that's the most interesting book about motoring you've ever read, or there is something hidden behind those unturned pages." She laughed. Her face lit up with the most beautiful smile I'd ever seen. She said, "I've been driving for 40 years in Chicago. I recently moved to South Carolina, and I have to take a driver's test. Is it that different driving a car in Illinois? I wonder what I've been doing wrong." So she lived in Chicago. She had to move to South Carolina, had to take a driver's test, and wondered what driving a car in Illinois would be different from South Carolina, and if she'd been doing something wrong. I said, "They want you to feel like you're sweet 16 again. Pretend it's your first time behind the wheel and make it fun." She said, "I'll put the pedal to the floor and take the instructor for a ride they'll never forget." She noticed the red hospice heart pin on my jacket and said, "Are you involved with hospice?" "Yes," I said. "I volunteer at a care center in Boca Raton, Florida. I've been involved with hospice since my husband's death 5 years ago." She said, "When my twin sister in Ohio died 2 years ago, hospice came into her home and took care of everything. The saddest thing was that my sister couldn't talk about her death with her husband." That's sad. He was in complete denial and wouldn't allow her to talk about it either. He would leave the room when she brought the subject up. My sister and I were always close. She called me several times a day to talk about her feelings. At first, she'd cry. Then she would calm down and feel better. She said that she wasn't afraid of dying. She just needed to talk with someone close to her. Her sister said, "I was glad that I could help her through this." She understood that he was suffering in his own way. But in 30 years, this was the first time they couldn't talk about something. Her frustrations were as painful as the physical aspects of her disease, and she got very depressed. He was the one that she was the closest to, and now he wasn't there for her. I don't understand why he couldn't talk to her. I said, "I hear this all the time. Some people are afraid to talk about death and wait until it's too late. After their loved one has died, their feelings of guilt because they hadn't done something that mattered to the deceased is tremendous. The guilt you'll carry around afterwards will be tremendous. People who are able to discuss both their illness and their death are more at peace with their loved ones. It was wonderful that you were there for your sister. How was her husband doing?" She said, "He called a month after her death. His feelings of guilt were overwhelming. He felt lost and knew that he had failed her when she needed him the most. It took several months of professional counseling, but he is better now. He realized that he should have talked to her, that he missed this opportunity to help her. He loved her so much and dealt with the situation the way he had to. He couldn't bring himself to acknowledge her death because he didn't want to be without her. Now he talks to me about her death and his own mortality. He doesn't feel guilty anymore. We are closer than we've ever been, and we know that my sister was loved by the two of us." Our conversation was over, and so was the plane trip. We collected our things and were thankful that her driver's manual and my hospice heart brought us together. As previously stated, why is the subject of death so difficult to talk about? Maybe some of you will. You'll have this conversation with your loved ones. If not, you will carry the guilt around with you as a burden. It will depress you more. It will sadden you more. And it won't help. Why isn't it appropriate to discuss around the dinner table? the office, or at a social event? Why does it have to be scary, secretive, and unmentionable? Why are some people so afraid of it? Perhaps it's the fear of the unknown. And it's just human nature to run away from the things we know so little about. Perhaps death's mysteries, that's a tongue twister. Perhaps death's mysteries are frightening because no one has ever come back to tell us what it was like. Or have they? Death isn't only frightening, it's frightening as to what you want it to be. Death is only frightening if frightening is what you want it to be. Why not take those fears and grow through them by helping others and discussing these issues openly and honestly? We talk about dying when we set up our financial portfolios for estate planning or when we purchase health and life insurance policies. I mean, think about it. Everyday stuff. We talk about dying when we set up our financial portfolios for estate planning, when we purchase health or life insurance policies. We want our families to be financially safe and secure in case we die. Why should we wait until the very end to say to our family, I want to talk to you about my death because I want you to inherit my deepest feelings and concerns as well as my material estate? Right, people. This is a topic you should be writing about to yourself. Write about your feelings of your demise. Why? I want to talk to you about my death because I want you to inherit my deepest feelings and concerns, as well as my material estate. My father was a man who read, my father, Abe Gordon, my father, lived to be 92. My father was a man who read the obituary column first in the morning. He wanted to see who was in it, but he always said that he wasn't ready to see his name in print. He was glad when he wasn't mentioned for he wanted to live forever. He was glad that he wasn't mentioned, for he wanted to live forever. My parents never felt comfortable discussing death with me, even as a young child. When I found my grandmother and several other relatives dead in their beds, we lived on Troy, New York, on 1st Street, and there were these row houses, and we lived on the second floor, or the first floor. My grandmother and aunts lived on the second, and somebody else lived in the third. And I was a kid. I was about 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. My grandmother, I was finding dead people in their bed as a kid, so it didn't really bother me all that much. My parents never felt comfortable about discussing death with me, even as a young child. When I found my grandmother and several other relatives dead in their beds, I remember coming down and yelling, I think Grandma's dead. I think Aunt Rose is dead. I think Uncle Dan is dead. They were dying like flies. No one ever talked about their passing with me. And why didn't they? Might it have made it easier for me to understand what I would have to face in the future? Why wouldn't my parents tell me the truth and help a little girl to understand what living and dying was about? It was my confusion about death and dying that I think caused me more uncertainty and problems later on. Maybe talking about death would have been the only thing that made me sense, because it was the only thing that they could have done. Talking about your feelings while you're still alive and able to do it makes sense, because doing that can be a great source of comfort and peace to those you leave behind. It might become more difficult after your loved one has gone. Circumstances might make it impossible to be able to share your feelings with someone you love, because everyone involved has their own emotional agenda and needs. Everyone deals with loss in his or her own way. Haven't I told you all that? People grieve differently. People don't have to grieve the same way. There's no cookbook that says a month, 6 months, a year. Go out, have some fun. Stop taking the advice of people. You deal with your stuff the way you have to. What I'm saying with this story is this man had terrible guilt because he never was allowing his wife to discuss her most personal things. And it hurt him later on a lot, perhaps more than it would have if she could talk to him. But it's a subject that You maybe, when the kid's 2, 3, 4, I mean, little kids, or, I'm not saying with Easter Bunny or Santa Claus, have a good time. But there is a point when maybe that subject should be very, very lightly discussed with children. Hi, Wendy. Oh, good to see you back. All right, so here we go. Everyone deals with loss their own way. If your loved one can't help you through this time, then talk to someone who can, because sharing your feelings is critically important. My husband knew he was going to die, but he didn't want to talk about it. He only mentioned it once during those 2 years, and it was to tell me that he wanted to be cremated. Yep. Jeffrey thought he'd live forever too, even with me. He thought I'd save him. Though I shared the physical, mental, and emotional aspects of his death, I didn't share his spiritual concerns. I am sorry for that because I missed out on something that was very important to me. I could have tried harder to get him to talk to me. See, this story pertains to me. Jeffrey wouldn't talk about his death. Took out life insurance, but he couldn't one time. So this story is my story. I am sorry for that because I missed out on something that was very important to me. I could have tried harder to get him to talk to me, but I respected his feelings even though I had the need to know for myself how he really felt. Maybe he couldn't accept the fact that he was dying. Maybe he thought that it wouldn't happen if he didn't talk about it. Maybe it was just too painful. Maybe he was at peace with himself and didn't have the need to share his feelings. In the end, it was his life, and it was up to him to bring this matter up. I never knew how he felt about his death, but I knew how much he loved his life. Ooh, this story is incredible. Oh, I'm a very good writer. I can tell the best stories, but I write them. If I really wanted to write stories today, I could do about where I live. I mean, I was here. The people where I live, they are more than a book. They are a book and 3/4. Maybe it was just too painful. Maybe he was at peace with himself and he didn't have the need to share his feelings, even with me. In the end, it was his life, and it was up to him to bring this matter up. I never knew how he felt about his death, but I knew how much he loved his life. I'll say so long for a little while. I love you, Susan. We're making great progress, people, if you've stayed on to the Mintz train of courage, hope, faith, love, loss, life. It's very simple. You're given I go back to this all the time. You're given emotions. Yeah, you are. I'm giving people at the mailbox who won't hear. People at birth. At birth, you are given feelings and emotions. Everything. Go read the book of Proverbs or Psalms, and you'll see it. Emotions and feelings are so real. You can hide away and try to prevent it. You think it doesn't feel. You don't feel something. People self-medicate, constantly self-medication now. They don't want to deal with their life. That's a huge problem. People are more depressed than ever because of this, the life we are involved in. The world is changing quicker than our minds can process it. I certainly can't process what's going on around me every day. And I don't even have anybody to really think about. You just have to cut people a lot of slack and meet them where they are. Because that's all they want sometimes. It's just, meet me where I am. I don't have to have a history with you. I don't have to say all the right things all the time. Meet me where I am. I happen to be at a time in my life when there's nothing you can't tell me that I haven't probably heard. I'm 76. That's used to be, I think, a gasoline thing, 76. Phillips or Sunoco or one of them. I mean, I never thought I'd live to see my age. I mean, as I said, I found most of my relatives dead in their beds before I was the age of 11. But life is meant to be lived. So if you can't talk about something, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. If you have some feelings that are deep, just talk to a friend. That's all. Get it out of yourself. That's what I'm trying to say is get it out of your brain. Your heart. Your heart. Volunteer. One of the greatest experiences I had, not just at the care center or meeting, I met so many more people outside of the care center, but I couldn't write everybody's story, obviously. I just couldn't. But one of the greatest things is, as I say, is write. Write your feelings out. That's all. I'm a writer, and I believe in the power of the pen. Get it out of your head and put it on paper, and then volunteer somewhere. Go to a soup kitchen. Go help people in need for food. Donate your time. There are so many ways to get out of yourself and not get to a point in depression where you want to even maybe take your own life because you're so depressed. Suicide, I was with the suicide prevention. It's sad, group. It's sad. So sometimes a hug is all people need. Sometimes a smile is all they need. Sometimes someone who says, hi, I really want to say, how are you today? And not run away, not hearing an answer. I'll say shalom, hello, shalom, goodbye, and shalom, peace. Bring some peace into your world. I try so hard every day to bring some into mine, and it's a challenge, but you can do it. So be kind, be patient, and call someone. Tell them you care. I feel like I'm talking to all of you all the time, calling you. I'm on my phone, so in some ways I'm calling you all the time, aren't I? You know, we've been doing this since April. Some of you have been with me for 3 months. We'll be finishing this up within 2 weeks because of the holiday coming up. I'm going to give you a respite Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. And we're on chapter 20 next, so it's 20, 21, 22, 23, 5 more. But I know you've gotten something out of this. I know many of you, even though you want to tune me out because you don't like this subject of hospice and death and dying, you listen. And you've been telling your friends, and you've been telling more friends, and telling more friends about the lady who writes books. And at SusanMintz.com, where all her stuff is. And on YouTube, where all my Committed to Love, my book is. You can find me so easily. But go to SusanMintz.com. And if you want to read all the episodes of Committed to Love, my book, they're all there. They're all on my website under Susan Reads. And you can read them all on Facebook or YouTube. When the hospice book is done, you'll be able to read all of those for nothing too. Because this little author isn't making a dime. I'm going for the big one. I want the series, the movie. I want it all big. I love y'all. Thank you so much for listening and for giving me your time. Your half an hour of precious time. I love you all dearly. Let me hit finish. Bye. Shalom.